We're back with Operation Epic Fury, and the U.S. and Iran reportedly receiving a two-phase ceasefire plan drafted by Pakistan. But President Trump is warning there will be strikes on power plants and bridges if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened by tomorrow's deadline. Matt Finn joining us now from Dubai with more details. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Griff. The AP and other outlets are reporting that Egyptian, Pakistani, and Turkish mediators have presented the United States and Iran with a proposed 45-day ceasefire plan that includes opening the Strait of Hormuz, which is far in the distance in the Persian Gulf behind me. Now, that proposal was reportedly sent to the U.S. and Iran last night. The Strait of Hormuz has become a key issue for any peace deal, as Iran is wreaking havoc on commerce and law-abiding ships trying to pass through that strait. Also last night, President Trump warning Iran of an 8 p.m. deadline tonight for Iran to come to the table, or there could be many U.S. attacks tomorrow. The president writing Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day all wrapped up in one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the blinking strait, you crazy blink, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah, President Donald J. Trump. Now, over the weekend, I met in person here with Dr. Sanwar Gargash. He is referred to as His Excellency here in this country. He's an advisor to the president here. Dr. Gargash tells me that if the United States presents the right plan, the UAE, the country that we are in, will join the United States in using force on the Strait of Hormuz. Dr. Gargash saying, quote, "We're not ready to act as a maritime force, but we will join any American-led effort, international effort, to secure navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. We are ready to play our part." Also, Dr. Gargash telling us that he considers the United States the UAE's greatest security ally, and that the UAE is ready to, quote, double down on its relationship with the United States right now. Griff.
Matt Finn, live for us in Dubai. Matt, thank you very much. And with that, let's bring in Fox News contributor Byron York joining us. Byron, good morning. Let's just dive right into where Matt was talking about this reported possible ceasefire deal, but it comes with the backdrop of the most successful daring rescue mission in U.S. history, really showing Iran that there is nothing that we don't have the ability to successfully do. Where do you see things headed?
Well, first of all, the rescue mission sends a huge message to our enemies and also to American forces. Obviously, to our enemies, it does show exactly what you just said, which is the United States can reach anywhere and do anything. And to our forces, it shows the United States Army or the United States military is always behind you, always behind you. That's an extremely important message to send to the troops. Now, you know, as far as what is going on, as far as the Straits of Hormuz are concerned, is that the president's Easter morning message clearly threatened attacks on Iranian power plants, on bridges, if they did not essentially open the strait by 8 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow night. Now, last week, the president was talking about getting other nations involved and having them police the strait if it were to reopen. So I think the president has maintained a lot of unpredictability on this, and I would imagine the Iranians have no idea what he's actually going to do.
Well, and he certainly was direct and straightforward in his social media post yesterday. Yeah. But you talk about messaging, Byron. I think that's such an interesting thing. What message do you think this sends to NATO? Because you talk about other countries being involved. And I thought Ari Fleischer had a really poignant post yesterday talking about that NATO may never be the same. It was a lengthy list, but he's basically laying out the fact that NATO will never be the same because the Western countries, Italy, Spain, France, they have not owned up to their obligations under NATO, while the Eastern side certainly has, with Poland being the only one that spends more money than the U.S. on their GDP defense.
Yeah, his posts, Ari's posts, set off a number of arguments, but clearly what he was saying is that some of the Western European NATO countries, France, Spain, the United Kingdom, by their initial refusal to cooperate with the United States in this, had really set a terrible precedent for themselves. And here again, President Trump was not asking them to send troops. He was not asking them to engage in attacks. He was asking for overflight rights and the right to use air bases, which the United States basically finances anyway. And yet those nations refused even that level of cooperation. And what Ari Fleischer was doing was contrasting those nations with the nations in Eastern Europe, which in the much more recent years had experienced Soviet domination and knew what it is like to have an enemy very close to you, and their cooperation with the United States. So what Fleischer was saying is there could be big changes coming in NATO, a shift in power, some sort of change, but something is going on in NATO.
We may learn more from the president himself at that 1 p.m. press conference today. Byron York, thank you for taking time.
Thank you, Griff.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.